Hey there guys, Nordic Warrior here, back with another video. So it's been a while since I did a prediction video. It's something that I kind of stopped doing for a long time on the channel since I kind of just got bored of them, but I figured I would get back into it because I do enjoy making these kinds of videos and they help me take my mind off things. So this fight that I want to talk about today is one that seems to have gone completely under the radar. I haven't seen anybody talking about this fight. I haven't seen anybody covering it. I haven't seen any videos about it in the YTBC. I haven't seen any articles about it. The only way that I found out about this fight was randomly. I was just scrolling through BoxRec, looking at the schedule, which I don't normally do nowadays, and I noticed that this fight was taking place on my birthday, which, kind of caught my attention. And the fight itself, I gotta be perfectly honest, this fight really intrigues me. In fact, I find this fight more interesting than any other fight that's taken place this year. Now, there are definitely more consequential fights than this one, there are definitely bigger fights than this one, but just in terms of the stylistic matchup here, and the kind of fight that I think this is going to turn out to be, this fight really has me going. I'm very much excited for it. I'm really looking forward to this one. So, the fight I'm talking about, it's a fight that's going to be taking place in the light middleweight division, I believe, for the vacant European title between Abass Baraou, I believe that's how you pronounce his name, Baraou, and he's going to be taking on Sam Eggington. I believe the fight's going to be taking place in Telford, so Sam Eggington's getting home advantage for the fight. But yeah, it's an interesting one. So both of these guys are fighters that I'm actually somewhat intrigued by. Now, Sam Eggington, you know, he's a fighter who I've been following for a long time. Obviously, back in the day, Sam Eggington was a matchroom prospect who had a lot of hype back in the day. He gained a lot of popularity on sort of the small hall circuit in the UK, basically because of his fighting style. You know, the guy didn't really have a lot of talent, didn't really have a lot of skill, but he had a good chin, and he was an absolute warrior and a pretty big ticket seller. So he was signed with Matchroom, he was getting a lot of hype, he was getting some decent wins at domestic level in the UK, you know, beating the likes of Dale Evans and Glenn Foote, who were really good domestic level fighters. He did have a couple of losses. He lost to Bradley Skeet, for example, which was a pretty bad defeat. A close fight, but, you know, if you're losing to someone like Bradley Skeet, you're not, you're not likely going to go on to be a world champion or anything like that. However, he did have some standout victories. For example, he beat guys like Frankie Gavin, and he had that famous knockout win over Paulie Malignaggi, where he basically let Paulie Malignaggi hit him on the chin 20 times and laughed in his face, and then knocked him out with a body shot. That was quite funny. Since then, however, his career became a complete disaster. He got knocked out several times, took a horrendous beating against Liam Smith, and it seemed like his career was over. However, he had a bit of an Indian summer in his career. He went back to the drawing board, went back to journeyman level, racked up a bunch of wins against journeyman, seemed to retool his game a little bit and became a little bit more technically sound than he was. He had a fantastic fight against Ted Cheeseman. If you guys haven't seen that fight, that was a great fight. Really close one. He lost it by a close unanimous decision, but you know, he really redeemed himself with that fight, and he showed that he wasn't just a face-first slugger and brawler. He actually could box a bit. You know, clearly, Sam Eggington was a guy who had enough self-awareness to know that the way he was fighting wasn't good enough. You know, he wasn't going to get away with it. If he wanted to progress in his career and actually achieve something, then he was going to have to retool his game a bit. And that's what he did. And he's looked very good since then, but he's kind of found his level. You know, he had a knockout win over Joe Pickford, who was a very good, highly touted prospect. He had a close loss to Dennis Hogan, who was sort of a fringe contender. He had a win over Carlos Molina, who was, of course, a very good fighter back in the day, who was, of course, faded. And yeah, now he's getting a shot at the European title, so we're going to see whether or not Sam Eggington has, at 30 years old, peaked as a fighter and how far he can really go. And I'm really intrigued by that because I really enjoy watching Sam Eggington fight, and I've really enjoyed following his career, because, again, he's a guy who went from being a bit of a freak show and a bit of a joke to being a serious, borderline, fringe world-level contender, because, I mean, if he wins the European title, who's to say he won't move on and fight at world level? He certainly could, but he obviously has to get by this fight. Now, Abass Baraou, I believe he's the favourite for the fight, and it's not hard to see why. If you look at Abass Baraou, he's a fighter who really fascinates me, because if you look at his record, now he's had about 15 fights, I believe, so he hasn't been a pro for that long. I think he turned pro in 2018. But what's very interesting about Abass is he hasn't been babied. Like, this guy, for his entire career, has been matched really, really well. Like, you can tell that his promoters, his backers, I believe he's promoted by the Sauerlands, you could tell that these guys had a lot of faith in him, a lot of belief in him, because from his pro debut, he's fought serious threats. For example, if you look at Abass Baraou's career, it's actually really surprising how well they've matched him. Like, it's really surprising the level of opposition they put him in with, even as soon as he turned pro. I mean, he was fighting undefeated German prospects. He was fighting guys like Ali Funica, who of course is a very seasoned, experienced journeyman. He also fought Carlos Molina, who I already talked about, who lost to Sam Eggington. He also lost to Abass Baraou, so they have a common opponent there, both of them beaten by decision. And another victory that he had early in his career, and this really surprised me, he knocked out a guy called John O'Donnell. Now, you guys might remember John O'Donnell. He was a prospect back in the day from Ireland. He was about 6 foot tall, and he was a welterweight back in the day. And I remember John O'Donnell, big, tall, slick southpaw, had a lot of hype back in the day from the old ITV4, back when they used to show boxing. A lot of people thought that he would go on to be world champion. He never really got there. He kind of drifted off into obscurity. But he still had a winning record by the time he fought Abass. He was like 33-2. So John O'Donnell was still a pretty dangerous fight for that stage of Abass's career, to say that he'd only been pro for about a year. He also fought Jack Koke. That was his one loss, Jack Koke. He lost that fight by split decision. A lot of people thought that fight was a robbery. I disagree. I actually thought Jack Koke did enough to win. I thought he won it pretty clearly by a few rounds, but it was a close and competitive fight. There's no doubt that it was close and competitive. I just think that the experience of Koke and the slightly better boxing fundamentals were what got the better of Abass that night. But ever since that fight, Abass has looked very, very good. He's had several impressive wins, most of them by knockout, against some pretty seasoned, durable journeymen. And yeah, now he's getting his big opportunity to fight for the European title. And assuming he wins this fight, he will obviously go on to be a contender, a world-level contender. So yeah, I'm really interested by this fight. We've got both guys here who, in my opinion, haven't had it easy. Again, both of these guys have been matched really well in their careers. They've fought really, really good competition. They've won fights that a lot of people wouldn't have expected them to win. They've also lost fights. Well, Abass, in his case, he's lost one fight. But again, there's no shame in losing to a guy like Jack Koke, especially when you consider the vast difference in experience between the two of them. I mean, he'd had, I think, only about 10 fights by the time he fought Jack Koke, maybe even not that many. So yeah, it's a very, very interesting matchup, this. Now, if you look at the overall styles of the two guys, Abass he reminds me of pretty much any fighter that trains with Adam Booth. You see them when they work with Adam Booth. They all adopt that exact same style, and he's no different. He has his hands down most of the time, and he kind of throws that up jab, if you know what I mean, kind of a corkscrew jab, and he's always on the move. He's got a very sort of herky-jerky style, moves his upper body a lot, but he's a lot more, in my personal opinion, he's a lot more defensively responsible than a lot of Adam Booth's fighters. He's got that right hand cocked. He's always adaptive, reactive. Like, if you're throwing the jab, he'll catch it with his right hand, and then he'll counter with the left hand. He's got a good counter left hook. He switches up the speed on his jab. He's very, very accurate with it. Very, very effective. He's got a lot of power. I think he's had 9 knockouts in 15 fights. And when you consider the opposition that he's been in with, fighting guys like John O'Donnell, seasoned contenders, fighting guys like Ali Funica, Carlos Molina, these are all really, really experienced, dangerous opponents. And the fact that he's been able to have such a high knockout percentage against that level of competition, it impresses me. Like, clearly he's got power. But he can also box too. He's been 12 rounds before, a couple of times actually, and he's finished strong, and he's got good stamina. So, to me, he's a little bit better conditioned and a little bit more defensively responsible than a lot of Adam Booth fighters who just, drop their hands and are just wide open to get hit most of the time, kind of like Michael Conlan and fighters like that. I think he's a little bit better than that. Now, he does have some flaws. Again, because of that style, he can be a little bit susceptible to pressure. One of the things I noticed in the Jack Culcay fight was he couldn't really penetrate Jack Culcay's high guard often enough to score points, and I think that's why he lost that fight. Because even though it might have appeared like he was winning some of the rounds, most of his shots were just being blocked and slipped by Culcay's superior defense and boxing fundamentals. So that kind of convinced the judges that Abass didn't do enough to win, and I agreed with them. I don't think he did do enough to win. So I do think against Sam Eggington, he needs to be a little bit more creative with how he lands his shots. He can't rely on that corkscrew jab the whole fight. He's going to have some lead hand control. He's going to have to break the guard, because at this stage of Sam Eggington's career, he does actually have a pretty good high guard. He's actually quite similar to Jack Culcay in terms of his fighting style. I think Jack Culcay's better. I think he's got better skills. I think he's got much better defense, much better stamina, and he's just a more well-rounded and better conditioned fighter who's fought and competed at a higher level. He's just got a better boxing IQ. But I think Sam Eggington is a bigger puncher than Jack Culcay, and I think he's naturally a little bit bigger too, so he could present some difficulties here. And I mean, he's had some of his best performances in his last couple of fights. I mean, knocking out Joe Pigford was very impressive, the way he went about it. And even when, like I was talking about earlier, even when Sam Eggington has lost fights, he's in the latter part of his career, he's given a very good account of himself. And he's proven to me that he can fight a hard, like back and forth 12 rounds, and he can finish very, very strongly. So, although I believe he's going into this fight as an underdog, I believe a lot of people expect Abass to win this fight convincingly. I actually don't think he's going to. I think that Sam Eggington has a very, very good chance of pulling the upset here. And I think the reason why is boxing fundamentals. Sam Eggington to me just looks like a guy who has learned on the job. He's not one of these cushy prospects who's been given an easy route to get a title shot and, been given a bunch of jobbers. Sam Eggington is a guy who literally came up the right way. He did it the hard way, fighting on small hall shows against his peers, against opposition that wasn't handpicked for him to look good. He fought guys who were on his level or even slightly above his level, and he was able to beat them. And he also had a couple of losses in the early part of his career, and I think he actually really learned from those losses and came back strong. And I honestly think that Sam Eggington has developed into a much better fighter these days. And something tells me that he might pull off the upset here. Like, when I first heard about this fight, when it first came into my mind, I thought surely Abass was at the stage of his career where he should be favoured, and surely he'd figure out Sam Eggington. But just the more I thought about it, and the more I thought about how much Sam Eggington appears to have improved over the past few years, since dropping down a level and going back to journeyman level and working his way back up to domestic level, I just think Sam Eggington, to me, brings so much more experience to the table than Abass does. And I think Sam Eggington is also the bigger puncher of the two. He's really big for the weight, hits really hard. And in addition to being the bigger puncher, he also has the better boxing fundamentals. He knows how to use the high guard, and he brings some of the same attributes to the table that Jack Culcay does. And you have to take into consideration that he has the home advantage. The fight's going to be taking place in the UK. So with him fighting at home, you have to give him an edge on the scorecards if it's close, or you have to at least assume that that's probably going to happen. So I'm going to go with the upset here. I might end up with egg on my face here. A lot of you guys might disagree, but I'm gonna go with the upset here. No pun intended. You know, I might go with the upset. I'm gonna go with Sam Eggington to win this fight on points. And I think it's going to be competitive. I think he's going to get hurt here and there, and I think that the jab and the overhand right and just the herky jerky, flashy style of Abass Baraou will give him problems. He might be ahead in the early part of the fight, but I think I've seen more from Sam Eggington that tells me that he'll be able to come on strong late, and I think he'll be able to avoid taking too much damage with his high guard and his boxing fundamentals. And I think he'll use his size and his power later in the fight to maybe pull out a close decision. So a stoppage wouldn't surprise me either, but I think the most likely outcome is Sam Eggington by a close decision. But I'm not at all confident in my pick. It's just a feeling that I've got. So yeah, that's how I see this one. I think it's a very interesting fight, and I'm actually really excited about it. Again, it's on my birthday. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing that fight. Let me know what you guys think. Thanks for watching, and God bless.